Julia the Elder had it all: luxury, beauty, and an entire empire calling her princess. Then Rome decided she was too much fun. Her father? Augustus, the man who founded the Roman Empire. Her crime? Being human in a city obsessed with pretending not to be. They called her the shame of Rome. She called it Tuesday. This isn't the sanitized marble statue history. This is the story of a woman who broke every imperial rule and paid the price for it. Get comfy, this is ancient gossip with consequences. Picture a city that's forgotten how to breathe. Rome, 30 BC, feels like the aftermath of an endless group project where everyone's dead except the guy who kept all the notes. The Republic has collapsed under the weight of egos and assassinations. Senators are basically professional backstabbers now. Streets are littered with marble dust and propaganda. Out of this chaos walks a man barely old enough to rent a chariot. Octavian. He's clever, ruthless, and allergic to failure. Rome's about to learn what happens when a man with control issues inherits an entire civilization. Octavian doesn't fix Rome, he rebrands it. He takes the corpse of the Republic, slaps on a coat of moral reform, and voila, it's now called the Empire. He builds peace like a corporate compliance manual. Thick, polished, and unreadable by normal people. He bans political chaos, then replaces it with himself. You could say Augustus is Rome's first influencer, and his filter is marble. He's brilliant at marketing. Temples are content posts. Statues are thumbnails. Victories? Just scheduled uploads. He carves his autobiography into stone walls with the humble line, "I found Rome brick, I left it marble," which is like saying, "I found Earth round, I left it spinning." The man practically invented the humble brag, and the city eats it up. They call him Father of the Nation, because authoritarian control freak doesn't look good on coins. Now imagine being his daughter. Julia the Elder is born into silk sheets and suffocating expectations. Her father might as well have built her crib out of legislation. Every step she takes is political theater. Her toys are ivory, her nannies are philosophers, and her bedtime stories involve proper civic virtue. She's not raised to live, she's raised to symbolize. From the moment she can walk, she's told she represents Rome itself, which sounds flattering until you realize Rome also means zero privacy forever. Augustus, ever the perfectionist, doesn't just want a family, he wants a brand. He invents moral laws to make Rome pure again, which is a bold move from a guy who won a civil war through bribery, betrayal, and a very expensive PR campaign. He literally criminalizes adultery, because apparently policing passion works great when you've already murdered half your rivals. If hypocrisy had a smell, the Palatine Hill would reek of incense and irony. And yet, Augustus probably believes he's doing the right thing. He's convinced virtue is something you can legislate, like taxes or hairstyles. He reshapes society to look tidy, moral, disciplined. The Senate nods along like an audience pretending to enjoy a podcast. Poets write odes about family values while sleeping with their patrons' wives. It's all very on brand for an empire that runs on contradiction. Meanwhile, Julia grows up inside a living museum of morality. She studies poetry, rhetoric, and the delicate art of pretending to agree with men. Every eye in Rome watches her, waiting for her to blink the wrong way. Her dresses are public statements. Her laughter is political commentary. Even her hairstyle trends across provinces, ancient Rome's version of going viral. And through it all, she learns one crucial skill: how to survive under surveillance with a smile. The palace is elegant. Sure, marble halls, gold mosaics, fountains whispering over imported lilies. But underneath the perfection hums tension. Her stepmother Livia runs the empire's emotional thermostat, controlling who gets warmth and who freezes. Augustus trusts her completely, which is the Roman equivalent of building your firewall out of ambition and charm. Julia watches them both and learns fast. Affection in this house comes with fine print. Sometimes, at night, when the Senate's done pretending to matter and the torches outside her window flicker, Julia steps onto her balcony. The Tiber glows like liquid bronze under the moon. The air smells like dust, salt, and too many secrets. From somewhere in the palace, she can hear her father dictating another decree. Maybe about marriage or morality or what counts as too much fun. She listens and wonders if Rome will ever stop confusing order with happiness. But make no mistake, Julia isn't some tragic statue waiting to crack. She's observant, funny, and dangerously clever. She starts to see the patterns beneath the propaganda. When the emperor praises modesty, senators' wives buy more jewelry. When he bans luxury, the elite invent subtler forms of showing off. Rome is addicted to rules it can break in style. And Julia? She's already thinking of testing how far the performance can stretch before it snaps. Still, there are gentle moments, evenings when Augustus actually laughs, or tells her about his uncle Julius Caesar with something like affection. In those rare flashes, the emperor becomes a father again, and Julia glimpses the man behind the marble mask. But morning always resets the illusion. Scrolls arrive, messengers kneel, and the empire's great performance begins anew. The warmth fades like candlelight under cold stone. You can almost feel the pressure building, an empire built on discipline, and a girl built from curiosity. He wants her to embody purity. She just wants to breathe. The contrast is inevitable, because when you build perfection on top of people, eventually someone's going to crack the marble. Let that sink in. The greatest ruler in the ancient world, the man who ended a century of bloodshed, will one day lose everything trying to control one woman, his own daughter. But that's later. For now, the empire sleeps soundly in its illusion of peace. The marble gleams, the Senate applauds, and somewhere behind a curtain, Julia laughs softly to herself. The first tiny tremor in an empire that thinks it's unshakable. Picture growing up in a house where every meal is a photo op and every breath is a press release. That's Julia's childhood in a nutshell. Rome's elite families gossip about who's sleeping with whom. Julia's father writes laws about it. Normal dad stuff. From the outside, her life is perfection carved in marble. Servants glide through candlelit halls. Senators bow too low. Poets trip over their own metaphors trying to describe her grace. But make no mistake, Julia is less princess and more living billboard. Every move she makes advertises her father's propaganda. Augustus doesn't just rule Rome, he stages it. And his daughter? She's the centerpiece of his moral campaign, the embodiment of everything Rome's supposed to be, which, coincidentally, is everything no one actually is. Her tutors recite virtue like a broken playlist. Loyalty, chastity, restraint, repeat until numb. Julia learns Latin, Greek, philosophy, and how to smile convincingly at men twice her age discussing her future like a business merger. Imagine being 13 and already treated like a Senate bill waiting for approval. Her laughter becomes her quiet rebellion, bright, musical, and slightly inappropriate. Rome eats it up. The people adore her. The senators whisper about her. The poets turn her into their muse, though, to be fair, most of them would write love poems to a well-shaped amphora if it got them patronage. But for Augustus, Julia is more than a daughter. She's the empire's brand mascot. When he pushes laws against adultery, he uses her image as proof that Rome's youth is pure and virtuous. It's like a morality influencer campaign, except with executions. The irony? His own marriage history looks like a soap opera marathon. 3 wives, a suspiciously ambitious stepmother in Livia, and more whispered scandals than any of his soldiers could count. Yet he demands Rome pretend to be virtuous. Augustus doesn't hate sin, he hates competition. Julia grows into her teenage years under this hypocrisy, surrounded by walls that echo moral lectures. Imagine being told that desire is shameful in a city where every temple has gods dedicated to fertility. She's smart enough to see the contradiction, and funny enough to laugh at it. One famous story has her walking through the forum, swarmed by admirers. Someone asks her how she manages to live such a chaste life surrounded by temptation. She smiles and says, "Easy. I only take men when I'm fertile, so the Republic benefits." That's right. She turns her father's fertility laws into a one-liner. Centuries before stand-up comedy, Julia weaponized wit. Still, the laughter doesn't always hide the loneliness. She's constantly watched. At night, the city glows under oil lamps. Outside the palace, Rome lives loudly. Taverns buzzing, poets drunk on cheap wine, lovers sneaking into gardens. Julia can hear the laughter drifting through her window. She imagines walking barefoot through those crowded streets, eating roasted nuts from a street vendor, maybe laughing too loud without worrying who's watching. But she can't. She's the emperor's daughter, a living standard for purity. The cage might be gilded, but it's still a cage. Augustus, meanwhile, grows obsessed with appearances. He passes law after law, punishing adultery, banning luxury, taxing bachelors. Rome starts to feel like a moral detox camp. But the stricter the rules, the more creative people get at breaking them. Private parties blossom behind closed villas. Lovers communicate in coded poetry. It's basically the Roman version of Finsta accounts. Julia watches this hypocrisy unfold like a soap opera written by the gods. The moral dictator of Rome can't even control his own senate, yet he thinks he can legislate lust. And deep down, she starts wondering, what if she stopped pretending? What if she let the real Julia slip through the cracks of the marble mask? That thought lingers, small, dangerous, intoxicating. Because beneath all the silk and ceremony, Julia has inherited something else from her father: defiance. The same fire that made Augustus conquer the world now burns, quietly, in his daughter. Except hers doesn't crave power, it craves freedom. Let that sink in. The same man who ended a civil war will soon start one inside his own family. But right now, he doesn't see it coming. He sees a perfect daughter, radiant and obedient. He doesn't see the sharpness behind her smile, or the questions behind her polite nods. He's too busy sculpting her into a symbol. And maybe that's the problem with symbols. Eventually, they stop representing you and start representing what you're afraid to admit. Julia's first wedding isn't so much a love story as it is a government merger with rings. The year is 25 BC, and Augustus decides that his daughter's hand will go to a boy named Marcellus, his own nephew. Because apparently, when you're Rome's moral compass, inbreeding is just keeping it in the family. Marcellus is young, charming, and the golden boy of the empire. He's the kind of guy who probably posed for statues before he'd even earned the toga. The city adores him. Augustus adores him more. He's the son-in-law/heir every emperor dreams of. Obedient, handsome, politically convenient. You can practically hear the imperial gears grinding behind the scenes. This isn't a wedding, it's brand management. Julia, meanwhile, smiles through the ceremony like a well-trained hostage. She's 15. Rome calls it a union. Historians might call it August grooming. But that's ancient politics for you. Every wedding doubles as a press release. Her father beams from the front row, soaking up applause for his devotion to family values. It's the Roman equivalent of a LinkedIn post about legacy and leadership. Behind the curtains, though, the atmosphere is weirdly tense. Livia, Augustus's wife and Julia's stepmother, isn't thrilled about Marcellus either. She's playing a longer game. She has her own sons. One of them, Tiberius, destined to be emperor one day, and Marcellus, this golden-haired poster child, is a threat to that plan. Livia smiles sweetly in public, but in private, she's sharpening strategy like a dagger. Julia senses it, though she can't prove it. Her new husband is kind but fragile, raised in privilege, used to adoration, not pressure. Within a few years, cracks appear. The stress of being the emperor's chosen heir is heavy. Every dinner feels like a Senate meeting with dessert. Julia tries to be a good wife, but she's barely out of childhood herself. Sometimes, when they're alone, she jokes that their marriage feels less like a romance and more like a treaty signed under duress. Then Marcellus falls sick. Really sick. Doctors swarm the villa, priests mumble prayers, and rumors start spreading faster than fever. Some say it's plague. Others whisper poison. And every suspicious eye drifts toward Livia. Rome loves its gossip, especially when it smells of family betrayal. When Marcellus dies at 19, the city mourns as if a god's favorite son has been taken. Augustus is devastated, and for once it looks genuine. Statues are draped in black, temples filled with offerings. Julia, barely 16, becomes the empire's most tragic widow. She's showered with condolences from senators who don't know her, and side eyes from women who do, because in Rome, grief has political weight, and a beautiful widow with royal blood is practically radioactive. Behind all the pomp, Julia grieves quietly, not just for Marcellus, who, by most accounts, was kind to her, but for the illusion that her life might ever belong to her. His death isn't freedom. It's a reminder. She's still a tool in someone else's game. Augustus, meanwhile, turns the tragedy into narrative fuel. He paints Marcellus as a symbol of youthful virtue, Rome's future cut short. His PR genius and emotional cruelty rolled into one. And Julia, standing beside her father during the funeral procession, realizes she's part of the same performance. Her tears are stage directions. She starts noticing how fast Rome moves on. The same senators who swore undying loyalty to Marcellus are already whispering about who'll take his place. The city doesn't pause for heartbreak. It feeds on it. Julia learns her first real lesson about power. Nothing in Rome lasts unless it's carved in stone, and even that can be rewritten. Still, a strange thing happens during those long, lonely nights. People start to talk about Julia differently. She's not just Augustus's daughter anymore. She's the emperor's widow, a woman with experience, tragedy, and a dangerous amount of influence. Every noble family suddenly wants to marry into her story. She's gone from pawn to prize, from political pawn to political opportunity. And Julia knows it. You can feel her growing sharper, quietly watching the men around her fumble for control. For the first time, she starts to see the absurdity of it all. The empire that lectures about morality runs on ambition, lust, and deception. Her father's laws might ban adultery, but they can't ban human nature. Let that sink in. The most powerful man in the world can make peace between nations, but he can't manage his own family without casualties. In private moments, Julia starts to develop a dry humor about her circumstances. When someone calls her blessed, she apparently replies, "Yes, blessed like a statue, admired but never free to move." She's learning the art of irony as survival. By the time the mourning period ends, Julia's smile has changed. It's not the naive glow of a girl raised in gold. It's the quiet smirk of someone who's seen the machinery of empire up close. She knows now that her father's moral order isn't divine justice, it's theater. And she's determined, one day, to improvise her own lines. The marble surface of Rome still gleams, but a hairline crack has formed. The kind that starts small and spreads silently through the structure. And Julia, beautiful, intelligent, inconveniently alive, is that crack. By now, Julia's become Rome's most eligible heartbreak. The poets write sonnets about her eyelashes. Senators trip over each other pretending to offer condolences. Translation: pitch marriage proposals thinly disguised as civic duty. The city buzzes with one question: who will the emperor choose next? And of course, the answer comes not from Julia, but from the man who treats her heart like a diplomatic treaty, Augustus himself. Enter Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, general, engineer, war hero, and walking dad energy. He's twice Julia's age, balding gracefully, and adored by the army for building Rome's naval dominance. Augustus trusts him more than anyone. He's the empire's fix-it guy, the duct tape that held Caesar's dream together. So naturally, Augustus thinks, why not marry my daughter to him? Because nothing says romance like an arranged alliance between a teenage widow and your 50-year-old co-worker. The marriage is framed as noble duty. Augustus calls it a union of virtue and strength. Rome calls it weird but politically convenient. Julia calls it, well, probably nothing printable. But she does what she's been trained to do. Smiles for the marble busts, poses for the poets, and becomes the empire's favorite photo op again. To be fair, Agrippa isn't a monster. By Roman standards, he's practically wholesome. He builds aqueducts, pays soldiers fairly, and doesn't seem to have a torture hobby, low bar, but still. He even seems fond of Julia in a distant, bureaucratic way. He's often away on campaign, which, honestly, might be the healthiest part of their marriage. Absence, after all, makes the heart grow less micromanaged. Together, they have 5 children: Gaius, Lucius, Agrippina the elder, Julia the younger, and poor little Posthumus, whose name basically means oops after death. Their family portrait looks like the imperial version of a Christmas card. All smiles, gold thread, and hidden tension. Augustus beams like he invented genetics. Julia, meanwhile, perfects the art of looking serene while mentally packing for a vacation that will never come. But something shifts. Julia, now older and wittier, begins to see how ridiculous this whole moral theater is. Her father keeps preaching purity, but everyone in power cheats like it's a sport. Senators flaunt mistresses as status symbols. Priests bless affairs in temples dedicated to gods of love and excess. And the emperor's own marriage to Livia, let's just say monogamy, was more of a brand aesthetic than a lifestyle. Julia starts laughing more. In public, loudly, dangerously. She hosts dinners that turn into symphonies of gossip and wine. Poets adore her, philosophers debate her wit, and senators, well, they can't decide if they want to marry her, quote her, or report her. Her reputation becomes half myth, half scandal, and all entertainment. She's like a Roman celebrity whose private life fuels public obsession. Meanwhile, Augustus grows restless. He's trying to sculpt the empire into moral perfection while his daughter becomes its most charming contradiction. But there's something almost poetic in it. The emperor who conquered chaos now terrified of laughter. Agrippa, to his credit, seems unbothered. He's too busy building things, aqueducts, roads, legacies. But the distance between them grows. Julia's letters become sharp and dry. Jokes about marble statues, dinner politics, her father's obsession with control. It's the kind of humor you only develop when freedom is rationed. One evening, during a festival at the Palatine Hill, Julia reportedly whispers to a friend, "Rome demands that I be pure, but they also demand I entertain them. I can't tell if they want a goddess or a ghost." It's a line that sums up her entire existence. Adored but confined, glamorous but powerless. And yet, she plays along. For now. Because rebellion in Rome isn't loud. It's subtle, theatrical, and calculated. Every smirk, every flirtation, every poetic line she quotes is a jab at the system. While Agrippa's off conquering provinces, Julia's conquering hypocrisy. Then fate or politics, which in Rome are the same thing, intervenes. Agrippa dies suddenly on campaign. Augustus mourns publicly, of course, but the city can't help noticing the undertone of relief. The empire's most capable man is gone, leaving a power vacuum, and Julia, once again, a widow. She's barely 30, dazzling, rich, and politically radioactive. Rome watches her next move with voyeuristic fascination. The Senate writes polite condolences, but what they really want is gossip. The emperor tightens his grip, terrified that his daughter, this brilliant, laughing, unpredictable woman, might finally step beyond his script. Because here's the truth Augustus can't face. Julia has become everything he's afraid of. The living, breathing proof that human nature refuses to obey empire. Let that sink in. He built roads, laws, and legacies, but he can't build a world where joy isn't suspicious. As Agrippa's funeral smoke curls into the Roman sky, Julia watches the flames and whispers something only the wind hears. Maybe it's sorrow, maybe it's relief, or maybe, just maybe, it's the first spark of rebellion beginning to flicker under her perfectly braided hair. The empire thinks it's watching another tragedy, but Julia knows this is just Act 2. The smoke from Agrippa's funeral has barely cleared when Rome starts whispering again. You'd think the city might give a grieving widow a moment to breathe. But no. In the capital of ambition, even grief is a social event. By the time Julia removes her mourning veil, the Senate's already drafting hypothetical wedding invitations. She's 30 years old, still beautiful, still witty, and now richer than most provinces. Translation: a political goldmine wrapped in silk. Every man with a title and half the ones without start orbiting her villa. Senators stroll by pretending to pay respects. Poets drop off scrolls with conveniently heartfelt verses. Even a few generals send fruit baskets, because nothing says, "I'd like to marry you for power," like imported pomegranates. Rome's elite behave like it's a reality show called Keeping Up with the Julie. But Julia's not some helpless prize waiting to be claimed. She's been the Empire's pawn long enough to understand how the game works, and now she's learning how to play it. Her laughter returns, louder than ever, echoing through marble courtyards that once echoed with moral lectures. The dinners she hosts become the stuff of legend, equal parts salon and scandal. Imagine a candlelit courtyard, fountains shimmering, couches draped in gold fabric, and Rome's most powerful men lounging like gossiping gods. Wine flows like the Tiber after a storm, and the conversations are anything but holy. The poets call her the new Venus. The moralists call her the ruin of Rome. And the truth? She's just living, something her father's laws forgot people were supposed to do. Augustus, meanwhile, is horrified. His daughter's parties are trending. Every law he passes about modesty gets undone by a single one of her dinner stories. He's built his empire on the illusion of control, and Julia, with one glass of wine and a devastating punchline, shatters that illusion nightly. One particularly juicy rumor claims she'd stand beneath her father's statue in the Forum and joke, "He built Rome's morals. I just test them for durability." Rome gasps. The emperor ages a decade. Somewhere, Livia is probably sipping wine behind a curtain and whispering, "Iconic." But here's the thing, Julia's rebellion isn't chaos for the sake of chaos. It's survival. She's lived her entire life under the microscope of men who worshipped marble ideals while treating women like stage props. Her parties are more than decadence, they're therapy sessions disguised as entertainment. For a few stolen hours, people get to drop their masks. Senators laugh without fear. Poets flirt without consequence. It's a temporary, glittering escape from the empire's suffocating perfection. And, of course, that makes her dangerous. The Roman elite start talking in hushed tones. Julia's influence has gone too far. The emperor's daughter shouldn't host philosophers and generals in the same room. What if she's plotting? Rome loves a scandal almost as much as it fears one. Every laugh she inspires becomes a threat to her father's image. Still, Julia doesn't stop. She dances, she debates, she dares to exist in full color while her father paints the empire in beige. She wears slightly too much perfume, laughs slightly too long, and says things slightly too clever for the marble patriarchy to handle. She's not trying to topple the empire. She's just tired of pretending to be a statue. Meanwhile, Augustus's propaganda machine keeps spinning. He builds more temples, issues more family laws, and surrounds himself with portraits of loyalty. But you can sense the paranoia creeping in. His entire empire runs on the premise that appearances equal virtue, and Julia, radiant and irreverent, is living proof that appearances lie. Behind closed doors, the emperor's temper flares. Advisors whisper warnings. Your daughter's gatherings are becoming problematic. He slams scrolls on tables, paces in silence, and mutters words like shame and betrayal. The irony, of course, is that the man who forgave murderers and traitors can't forgive laughter. But Julia isn't oblivious. She knows she's walking a fine line. The tighter the laws get, the more power her defiance holds. And the more she's whispered about, the more alive she feels. There's something electric in the danger. Her friends beg her to tone it down. Her servants start warning her about spies at her parties. She smiles and says, "If Rome wants a villain, at least let me be a stylish one." Let that line linger because it's the kind of thing that belongs in marble. By now, the city's split in two. Those who idolize her and those who want her gone. To some, she's a symbol of freedom, a woman who laughs in the face of hypocrisy. To others, she's a cautionary tale, proof that even emperors can't control what they create. And then, one night, a rumor starts that changes everything. Someone, no one knows who, claims that Julia's private life isn't just scandalous, it's treasonous. That her parties are more than parties. That behind the laughter and wine, there's conspiracy. It's nonsense, of course, but in Rome, nonsense is just truth waiting for an audience. The whispers crawl through the streets, up the marble steps of temples, into the emperor's ear. Julia, unaware, hosts another dinner, full of laughter, poetry, and dangerous joy. But this time, the air feels heavier. The servants whisper less. The guards stand a little closer. Somewhere, deep inside the palace, a father starts to doubt his daughter. And that, right there, is when the empire's mask begins to crack. Because it won't be war or famine that shakes Rome next. It'll be a woman who laughed too loudly for its comfort. By this point, Augustus has transformed from father of the nation into that one dad who lectures everyone at dinner about virtue while secretly scrolling through scandalous letters after dessert. Rome's golden emperor is now a man possessed, not by power, but by purity. And nothing is more dangerous than a hypocrite convinced he's saving civilization. It starts small, a few laws about marriage, fidelity, and public behavior. On paper, they sound noble. Who wouldn't want a city built on family values and clean living? But this is Rome, the same city that literally worships a god named Bacchus, whose main job description is party coordinator. Augustus might as well be banning oxygen. Soon, the laws become invasive. Adultery, punishable by exile. Staying single too long, taxed. Having too much fun, suspicious. He even creates a morality police, basically toga-clad Karens tasked with ensuring everyone's being appropriately boring. It's the empire's most ambitious social experiment, and predictably, it fails spectacularly. The rich continue sinning with better curtains. The poor get punished for it. And somewhere in the middle, Julia becomes the empire's favorite contradiction. The emperor's daughter, the rule breaker, the walking paradox. Her dinner parties haven't stopped. They've just gotten cleverer. She holds them under the guise of literary salons, where poets read lines about virtue while trying not to make eye contact with the men they're mocking. It's performance art, subtle rebellion dressed as culture. Julia listens, smirking, wine glass in hand, the faintest glimmer of danger behind her laughter. Meanwhile, Augustus is crafting new speeches, new decrees, new ways to tell people how to live while pretending he's not falling apart inside. He wants Rome to see him as divine, the man who restored order after chaos. But here's the catch. Divine figures can't have messy families. And Julia, no matter how beloved she is by the people, has become his greatest PR crisis. The emperor's advisors tiptoe around the topic like it's a live volcano. They bring up her behavior gently, cautiously, always in vague terms. Augustus listens, jaw tight, eyes cold. When one senator finally mutters something about rumors of inappropriate company, Augustus reportedly slams his fist on the marble table so hard it echoes through the palace. You can almost see him, the mighty emperor standing over the map of his empire, realizing he can control the Nile, the legions, even the Senate, but not his own daughter. That's the thing about perfection, it's allergic to honesty. Rome, of course, eats this up. Scandal is their national sport. Gossip spreads like wildfire through the streets. Have you heard? The emperor's daughter hosts philosophers at midnight. Did you know she walks without a chaperone? Someone saw her, laughing. Each retelling gets juicier, and suddenly Julia isn't just a person. She's a headline. But the funniest part? No one actually knows the truth. Some say she's having affairs with half the Senate. Others insist she's plotting rebellion. A few whisper that she's just lonely. And in a way, that last one might be the closest to the truth. Because beneath all the wit and sparkle, Julia's world is shrinking. Every friend is a potential spy. Every laugh could be evidence. She knows the walls have ears, especially the ones in her father's palace. And yet, she keeps laughing. It's her quiet protest, her middle finger to the empire's suffocating morality. Then comes the poetry. Oh, the poetry. Anonymous verses start appearing around Rome, witty, scandalous, unmistakably inspired by Julia's circle. They poke fun at the emperor's obsession with virtue, hint at secret trysts, and turn his laws into punchlines. The city can't get enough. Augustus, not so much. Imagine being the ruler of the world and realizing you've lost control of the narrative, to memes carved in stone. So the emperor doubles down. More laws, more spies, more lectures, and Julia's laughter, once a social quirk, becomes an act of defiance. The people adore her for it. The Senate fears her for it. Augustus loathes her for it. At this point, the whole thing feels like a tragicomedy. The Empire's most powerful man is desperately trying to discipline human nature itself, while his daughter becomes its poster child. Every time he tightens his grip, she slips further through his fingers. A symbol of everything Rome secretly is. Indulgent, passionate, alive. You can almost feel the collision coming. The emperor's laws versus his daughter's existence. The godlike ruler versus the inconvenient truth that his bloodline doesn't obey his script. Let that irony breathe for a second. The man who conquered nations can't conquer nuance. As the rumors pile up, Augustus starts to retreat into himself. His speeches grow colder, his smile thinner. He begins referring to morality not as philosophy but as war. And somewhere, under all that marble and gold, you sense a father quietly losing faith in the idea that his empire or his family can ever be clean enough for him. But the city keeps whispering. The poets keep writing. And Julia, radiant and untamed, keeps walking through the forum as if she owns it. The citizens bow. The guards watch. The statues stare. And the empire holds its breath. Because everyone knows the moment one of those whispers reaches the wrong ear, the show will end. And Rome? Rome loves a good tragedy, especially one performed by its own royal family. Rome sleeps lightly. It's one of those humid nights when the air feels thick enough to drink, and even the marble walls seem to sweat. The city hums under the weight of its own secrets. Senators snoring beside mistresses, guards bribed to forget what they saw, poets sneaking home with stolen scrolls. But tonight, one secret doesn't stay buried. Somewhere in the shadows of the Palatine Hill, a whisper travels. Fast, too fast. A servant tells a guard, who tells a friend, who tells a senator, and by dawn, the rumor has become an earthquake. Julia, the emperor's daughter, has been caught in immoral acts with not one, but several high-ranking men, senators, nobles, possibly even married ones. The names change with every retelling, but the punchline stays the same. Augustus's daughter is the headline scandal of the empire. By the time the sun breaks over the forum, the gossip has reached the palace. Augustus's secretary bursts into his chambers, pale and shaking. He delivers the news in fragments. Parties, lovers, witnesses, poetry, sin. And for the first time in years, the emperor says nothing. He just sits there, stone still, the moral architect of Rome staring at the ruins of his own design. Let that image sink in, the most powerful man on earth brought to silence by his own blood. Historians say Augustus aged 10 years overnight. It's poetic exaggeration, sure, but the man does look like he's been spiritually sucker-punched. The laws he wrote to control the people have now turned inward like a knife. His empire's purity is compromised, not by barbarians or traitors, but by his own daughter's laughter. He summons Julia immediately, not to the court, that would be too merciful, but to his private study. The room where he's signed treaties, rewritten laws, and ruined nations now becomes a courtroom of one. The door opens. Julia enters, dressed plainly, her face unreadable. The marble floor stretches between them like an ocean. On one side, the emperor, a man worshipped as divine. On the other, his daughter, mortal, fallible, unrepentantly human. He begins to speak, and the words spill out like lava. Betrayal, disgrace, humiliation. His voice trembles not from weakness but from fury restrained. "Do you deny it?" he finally asks. Julia doesn't flinch. She looks at him, really looks at him, the way a daughter looks at the man who built her cage. And then, calmly, she says nothing. Not a tear, not a plea, not a defense. Just silence. Because what can she say? He's the emperor. He decides what's true. The silence stretches so long it feels like it could crack marble. Outside, the cicadas drone on, blissfully ignorant of the empire unraveling behind closed doors. Finally, Augustus turns away. His hand shakes slightly as he grips a scroll. It's the morality law, his law, the one that forbids adultery, punishable by exile or death. The words glare back at him like a curse he wrote for himself. He could destroy the evidence, rewrite the record, pretend none of it happened. But that would mean admitting hypocrisy. And Augustus, master of order, enemy of chaos, cannot live with contradiction. So he chooses to sacrifice blood for the sake of image. Outside the palace, word spreads like wildfire. Crowds gather in the forum, buzzing with anticipation. The emperor's daughter is being tried by her father's own hand. No court, no jury, just the same man who declared himself the moral spine of the empire now turning it against his child. Some whisper pity, others relish the drama, a few even pray, but most, they watch, because Romans love theater and this is the greatest show in town. Julia is escorted back to her quarters under guard. Her friends, her servants, her lovers, all rounded up. Some are executed quietly in the night. Others are exiled to corners of the empire where even the gods get lost. And Julia? She stands in the middle of it all, calm in the storm. One witness later recalls she muttered, "If only my father remembered he was mortal too." The kind of line that doesn't just sting, it echoes through centuries. You can almost hear the irony tearing through the palace halls. The emperor who wanted to save Rome from corruption is now corrupted by his own obsession with purity. His laws no longer protect order, they devour it. That night, Augustus walks through his gardens alone. The air is still heavy, the scent of myrrh and shame blending into something poisonous. He passes statues of gods, heroes, ancestors, all carved in perfect, expressionless marble. He built this world to be eternal, unyielding. And yet, for the first time, he realizes the truth. Nothing carved from flesh can ever be perfect. Somewhere in the distance, he hears laughter. Maybe it's memory, maybe it's her, but it follows him like a ghost until dawn. Rome wakes the next morning to find its empire intact, its emperor silent, and its princess gone. Let that settle. The city that conquered the world couldn't handle one woman's humanity. The marble is cracking. The gods are watching. And the daughter of Rome's emperor has just become its most dangerous mirror. There's a cold kind of silence that falls over Rome after a scandal, the kind that hums louder than the crowd. It's the sound of power rearranging itself. Julia's laughter is gone now, replaced by whispers that cling to the marble like smoke. Every citizen knows what's happening, but no one dares to say it aloud. When emperors deal in family drama, people learn to keep their heads down. Literally, the emperor's palace, usually a theater of pomp, turns into a courtroom of ghosts. Except this trial has no witnesses, no defense, and no mercy. Augustus is the judge, the law, and the executioner. His daughter's name, once engraved on statues, sung in poetry, toasted at feasts, now appears only in trembling whispers between servants. The official decree arrives like thunder. Julia, daughter of Augustus, is found guilty of adultery and immorality. Crimes defined, of course, by the emperor himself. Her lovers, condemned. Her friends, questioned, exiled, erased. One of them, Aulus Antonius, the son of Mark Antony, is forced to take his own life. Rome loves irony. The child of Augustus's greatest enemy dies for loving Augustus's child. No one dares to ask questions. Not about the evidence. Not about the fairness. Because in Rome, justice is whatever keeps the empire's illusion of order intact. And Augustus is desperate to convince the world, and himself, that this isn't personal. He even stages a little show. He gathers the Senate, his voice calm but eyes hollow, and declares that his own daughter must face the same laws as the common people. The senators nod obediently, pretending this isn't horrifying, pretending they're not imagining their own families next. Augustus tells them, "I have sacrificed my blood for the purity of Rome." The words sound noble until you realize he's using virtue to excuse cruelty. Outside, the city buzzes with conflicted awe. Half the population admires the emperor's discipline. The other half mourns Julia like a martyr of joy. Women leave flowers at her statue in the forum until guards remove them. Someone even scrawls graffiti on a temple wall. Better to be Julia's lover than Augustus's kin. It doesn't last long before being erased, but the message hangs in the air like incense. And Julia? She faces her sentence with that same terrifying calm that drives powerful men insane. When told she's to be stripped of her titles and wealth, She reportedly smirks. When her jewels are taken, she says, "Good. They were heavy anyway." When Augustus refuses her food for days as punishment, she quips, "At least my appetite won't scandalize Rome now." This dark humor as rebellion, sarcasm as survival. That's what makes her dangerous. You can exile a person, but you can't exile irony. The night before her departure, the palace is unnaturally quiet. The same halls that once rang with banquets and music now echo with the sound of sandals and distant sobbing. Julia's servants, the few still loyal, help her pack what little she's allowed. A few robes, writing tablets, and the memory of a life she never truly owned. Livia watches from the shadows, emotionless as always. The stepmother who orchestrated half the empire's alliances doesn't interfere. Some say she's the one who whispered in Augustus's ear to make the punishment irreversible. Others think she simply enjoyed watching chaos clean up the competition. Either way, she wins again, as always. At dawn, Julia is escorted through the city, her head held high, her face uncovered. The streets are lined with silent spectators. Some look away in fear, others watch in awe, because even in disgrace, she radiates something the marble statues never could: humanity. The soldiers don't announce her crime. They don't have to. The empire already knows. To some, she's a sinner. To others, a symbol. To everyone, she's a warning. They march her down to the harbor, where a ship waits, small, unadorned, its sails pale against the morning light. The sea smells like iron and salt. She doesn't cry. She doesn't plead. She just stands there for a long moment, staring at the horizon as if daring it to blink first. And then, right before boarding, she reportedly turns to the officer escorting her and says, "If my father remembered he was mortal too, this empire might be a gentler place." It's the kind of line that echoes across centuries, the sound of dignity refusing to die. Back in Rome, Augustus retreats to his study, the ink of his decree still drying. His aides say he spends hours alone, muttering prayers to the gods of virtue, though none seem to answer. You can almost see the shadow creeping across his legacy, the realization that the man who built Rome's moral code has just broken his own soul to preserve it. Meanwhile, in taverns across the city, people whisper Julia's name like a charm, not in reverence, not in fear, in fascination, because in a world built on pretense, her fall feels uncomfortably honest. She has no trial, no defense, just a sentence written by the man who once taught her how to read. The ship's sails catch wind, pulling her toward exile. The emperor turns away from the window, eyes hollow, lips pressed into silence. Rome returns to business as usual. Senators plotting, citizens gambling, poets pretending not to write about her. But everyone knows something has changed. For all his laws and all his gods, Augustus has done what no enemy ever could. He's wounded Rome's heart from within. And the empire, though it doesn't know it yet, has just begun to rot. The ship cuts through the Tyrrhenian Sea like a knife through silence. Julia stands at the deck, watching Rome shrink into a faint smear on the horizon. Her father's empire dissolving into gray mist. The gulls circle above her, screaming into the wind like ghosts who still haven't forgiven her for laughing. She's 37, banished to a strip of rock barely visible on the map. The official name is Pandateria Modern Ventatine, but everyone just calls it what it is: the Island of Shame. Pandateria isn't a tropical exile. It's not even picturesque in the tragic poet's sense. The cliffs are jagged, the winds never stop, and the only green thing on the island is envy. It's where Rome sends its embarrassments: failed generals, inconvenient wives, political liabilities. And now an emperor's daughter. The guards escort her up the rocky path to a tiny villa overlooking the sea. Villa is generous. It's 2 rooms, damp walls, and a view of eternity. No servants, no perfumes, no laughter. Just the steady rhythm of waves gnawing at stone. The guards aren't cruel, but they're not kind either. They've been told they're guarding a sinner. It's easier that way. For the first few days, Julia says nothing. She listens. The wind howls like a sermon. The sea roars like an audience that's already made up its mind. She writes on her wax tablets, notes, thoughts, fragments of poetry. No one will ever read them. Her father forbade correspondence. Her children's faces flicker in her memory, blurred by distance and politics. She doesn't know that 2 of them will die before she's ever allowed to see the mainland again. Let that settle. The woman who gave Rome its heirs now forbidden to hear their voices. When night falls, she lights an oil lamp and watches it struggle against the wind, sneaking through the cracks. The shadows crawl up the wall like questions she's too tired to ask. Once she had poets writing sonnets in her name. Now even the gods have gone quiet. But isolation does strange things to the human mind. It strips away vanity, then memory, until only truth remains. And the truth is that Julia, even exiled and forgotten, still refuses to break. She starts talking to the sea, not in madness but in mockery. She tells it stories of Rome, of the parties, of her father's sermons. She imagines the waves rolling their eyes, saying, "Humans and their empires," always pretending eternity lasts longer than weather. There's a strange peace in that. Every few months, a ship brings supplies, grain, water, sometimes letters that never reach her hands. The sailors avoid her eyes, afraid that sin is contagious. Occasionally, one of them slips her a scrap of parchment with a rumor from the mainland. A new law, a dead senator, a fresh scandal. Rome, it seems, hasn't become any more virtuous in her absence. It's still drunk on hypocrisy, only now without her laughter to expose it. One day, a storm hits the island. Waves smash against the cliffs, tearing at the shore like punishment. Julia shelters inside her villa, the roof groaning under the weight of divine judgment. She laughs, loud, defiant, almost joyful, because really, what can Rome do to her now? Exile her twice? The sea doesn't care about moral laws. It doesn't care who her father is. For the first time, she's free from pretending. Augustus, back in Rome, tells the Senate he's done what the gods demanded. He claims that the exile of his daughter has restored balance to the empire. He even dedicates temples to virtue and chastity. The public applauds. The poets stay quiet, self-preservation disguised as piety. But behind closed doors, people still whisper. How can a man call himself the father of Rome when he cannot forgive his own child? Julia hears rumors of those whispers years later, carried by sailors like contraband. They make her smile, not because they vindicate her, but because they prove one thing: her silence is louder than his decrees. Let that sink in. The empire runs on Augustus's laws, but it dreams in Julia's memory. Time drags. Seasons blur. The only calendar on Pandateria is the shifting sea. Some mornings, Julia walks along the cliffs and imagines what the mainland looks like. The crowded markets, the clinking of amphorae, the smell of bread. She wonders if the people still remember her name or if she's just that scandal now. Probably both. The guards eventually grow accustomed to her. They stop calling her Lady Julia and start calling her the Quiet One. One even confesses that he used to cheer her father's speeches. "Do you still?" she asks. He shakes his head. "Not since I met his daughter." It's not rebellion, just clarity. And that's the cruel irony of exile. It doesn't erase you. It distills you. By her 4th year on the island, Julia has become a legend whispered in both pity and awe. Parents warn their daughters not to end up like her. Young women secretly imagine being brave enough to try. Some nights, when the wind is still and the sea glassy, Julia sits on the edge of the cliff, watching the moonlight turn the waves silver. She closes her eyes and remembers the laughter. Not the scandalous kind, but the real one, the sound of being alive. The empire might have taken her freedom, her titles, her voice, but it never took that. Maybe that's what Augustus never understood. Power can punish, but it can't rewrite humanity. And as the waves crash against the cliffs below, you can almost hear it. Faint, rhythmic, timeless. The sound of Rome's shame turning into defiance. Morning comes slowly on Pandateria, like it's reluctant to face the day. The air smells of salt, iron, and something ancient, regret, maybe. Julia wakes to the sound of waves tapping against rock, the only applause she gets now. Her ink-stained fingers hover over her wax tablets, carving out sentences that no one will ever read. Words are all she has left, her only act of rebellion in a world that's forgotten her. She writes letters to her children, to Gaius, Lucius, and Agrippina. Each one starts the same, "My dear, you will not read this." Because she knows her father's guards will confiscate them, she writes anyway. Every stroke of the stylus is a heartbeat against oblivion. She tells them stories of their grandfather when he was still human, before he decided to become marble. She describes the moonlight on the sea, the smell of figs in the wind, the sound of laughter before it was outlawed. Her words are heavy, but her tone, still wickedly clever. If the emperor ever tells you what virtue looks like, she writes, remember, it wears a mask, but those letters never leave the island. Augustus, ever the curator of reality, forbids any correspondence. The empire must remain pure, its narratives unpolluted by humanity. Her messages are seized, burned, or stored in some bureaucrat's archive, labeled undesirable material. Even her memories are censored. Let that sink in, the woman who gave Rome its heirs now erased from the same empire that parades their statues. Then comes news, the kind that doesn't arrive by ship but by rumor. Her son Gaius is dead, struck down in battle far from home. Not long after, Lucius follows. She learns this from a guard, who heard it from a sailor, who overheard it in a tavern. The empire mourns them publicly. Julia mourns them privately, wordlessly, violently. She doesn't cry, not where the guards can see. Instead, she carves their names into the wall of her villa, one above the other, like prayers that the gods stopped checking long ago. The sea wind erodes them slowly, but she keeps retracing the lines, refusing to let them fade. Augustus, back in Rome, makes grand speeches about loss and destiny. He speaks of duty, of sacrifice, of divine will, but he never mentions her. The mother, the exile, the inconvenient reminder of how his empire's greatness came at the cost of his own blood. The irony is almost cruel. The emperor who built monuments to eternity now haunted by a silence that won't die. Days blend into months, months into years. Julia writes anyway, to her children, to her father, to Rome, letters that no one will ever answer. Her stylus becomes confession, therapy, weapon. She doesn't ask for forgiveness. She asks for recognition, to be seen not as a cautionary tale, but as a human being who simply refused to pretend. Sometimes, she wonders if her father ever thinks of her, whether he imagines her surrounded by desolation, whether he still believes he did the right thing. She doubts it. Men like Augustus don't regret. They justify. On quiet nights, she watches the stars flicker above the sea and whispers lines from the poets her father once censored. Even stone remembers what warmth feels like. It's her way of staying alive, of reminding herself that even forgotten women leave fingerprints on history. Rome, meanwhile, moves on. Victories are celebrated, temples dedicated, feasts held. Citizens toast to peace, never realizing it's been bought with silence. Julia's name fades from official inscriptions. Her existence becomes rumor, then myth. But among the sailors, her story spreads like wildfire. They speak of her wit, her laughter, her defiance. One claims she tamed a gull to deliver her letters to the mainland. Another swears she sings to the sea at dusk, and the waves calm to listen. Exaggerations, sure, but even exile can't kill charisma. And through all of it, Julia keeps writing. It's not hope, it's compulsion. The act itself is victory. She imagines her words floating through the ether, carried by the gods to anyone still willing to listen. Halfway through one letter, she pauses and smiles. A rare, tired smile. She writes, "History will forget me, but it will remember my father. And maybe one day, someone will wonder if he was ever wrong." That's not prophecy. That's precision. She seals the tablet with wax, presses it into a niche in the wall, and leaves it there. A time capsule of rebellion disguised as resignation. Still watching, you know what to do. The algorithm, much like Rome, thrives on forbidden stories. As the night deepens, Julia steps outside. The moon paints the sea silver, and the wind feels less like punishment, more like company. She closes her eyes and whispers one last line to the waves. Not a prayer, not a plea, just a truth too heavy for history. They made me a ghost to protect their gods. But ghosts live longer than gods. The sea answers with thunder. Somewhere across the horizon, Rome sleeps, smug, proud, unaware that the woman it buried in silence has just outlived it in memory. Rome keeps spinning, loud and self-important, as if forgetting were proof of progress. Years slide by. Empires don't die with a scream. They just get distracted. Augustus builds new monuments to himself, each one taller, cleaner, more polished than the last. Senators bow, poets flatter, citizens cheer. And somewhere in the middle of that perfectly choreographed applause, everyone quietly agrees not to mention her name. Julia becomes what every empire needs to survive, a cautionary ghost. Her statues disappear from public squares. Her portraits are scraped off walls. If anyone asks about the emperor's daughter, officials just shrug and change the subject. It's easier that way. History loves its heroes neat and its women silent. But memory has a funny way of sneaking back. Rome might erase her face, but the city still hums with her laughter. It's in the echo of a wine cup raised too high, in the whisper of silk down an alleyway at midnight. The people feel it, that unspoken rebellion that never quite died. Poets start smuggling her into metaphors. The storm that mocked the sky, the flame that refused the temple. Augustus can ban her name, but he can't ban poetry. He ages fast now. The perfection he carved into law is turning brittle. The Senate obeys him out of habit, not love. The same citizens who once praised his family values are quietly breaking every rule he ever made. The irony would make Julia howl with laughter. Meanwhile, Panditeria keeps shrinking her world to essentials. Sea, sky, breath. The guards barely watch her anymore. She's less prisoner, more rumor. She spends her mornings walking the cliffs, counting waves the way priests count prayers. The horizon becomes her calendar. Sometimes, ships appear in the distance, sails glowing orange at sunset. For a heartbeat, she imagines one is coming for her. It never does. She smiles anyway. Hope, she's learned, is a muscle. It only dies if you stop using it. And then, one evening, she sees something stranger than any dream. A Roman galley gliding closer than usual, torches burning bright. For a moment, she feels the impossible pulse of recognition, the sound of her city returning for her. But the ship never lands. It just circles the island once, like a memory checking its reflection, then sails away into the dark. The waves close behind it, indifferent. Back in Rome, the poets whisper again. They say she's still alive. They say she writes letters to the moon. They say she forgave him. Rumor becomes myth, and myth becomes comfort. People start to believe Julia's exile wasn't punishment, but transformation. That she became something the empire couldn't contain. Free. Augustus doesn't like that version. He issues new decrees, new oaths, new speeches about loyalty and purity. Each one feels more desperate than the last. He builds a temple to his own godhood, but it's haunted, not by curses, but by conscience. Every time he passes a statue of a woman, he sees her face flicker there for a second, laughing. The Senate pretends not to notice. Rome pretends not to care, but the silence is cracking. You can almost feel it. The city holding its breath, waiting for its own lie to collapse. The empire that once bragged about conquering time is now terrified of memory. And on that lonely island, Julia keeps walking the same cliff path, night after night, watching the stars like old friends who remember her real name. Sometimes she talks to them, sometimes she doesn't. But either way, she keeps existing quietly, stubbornly, beautifully, just beyond the reach of Rome's perfection. Let that sink in. The daughter they tried to erase has outlasted their applause. Rome forgets because forgetting is easier than guilt. But the sea doesn't forget. The wind doesn't. And neither, apparently, does history. Because centuries later, long after Augustus's temples crumble and his name fades from marble, People will still whisper about the emperor who exiled his own daughter, and the woman who forgave the world by surviving it. Rome loves its illusions, and Augustus even more so. To the public, he is still the godlike emperor, the immortal symbol of peace, the man who tamed chaos and crowned himself destiny. But behind the palace walls, the god is cracking. The marble mask doesn't fit like it used to. His reflection in the polished bronze mirrors looks older, smaller, almost human. He spends his mornings reading reports from governors and generals, pretending to care about trade routes and border skirmishes. But his eyes skim the words, searching for one that never appears. Julia. Even her name has been erased from official correspondence. She's a ghost the empire refuses to acknowledge. Yet, she's everywhere, in his speeches, in his silences, in the way he hesitates before every word about virtue. Let's be honest. Augustus isn't sleeping well. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees her standing in the Senate, silent and unbroken, as he condemned her. The image repeats like punishment. His wife Livia watches him quietly, the way she always has, the same stillness as a viper in the sun. She doesn't ask about Julia anymore. She doesn't need to. She knows regret when she sees it. He starts visiting temples more often. Not for faith, Augustus doesn't pray, he negotiates. He makes offerings to the gods of the hearth, the household, the sea, the same gods who watched him exile his own daughter. He leaves gold, wine, incense, anything except the one thing they actually want: honesty. And Rome notices. The Senate whispers that the emperor has become sentimental, that the father of the nation is losing his divine edge. Some even dare to suggest he's afraid. They're not wrong. Augustus has conquered the world but can't conquer memory. It follows him everywhere, whispering in voices he recognizes. Julia's laughter, echoing through marble halls that used to love her. One night, he's found pacing in his study, staring at the wax bust of her face he once had commissioned. It's cracked now, the features softened by age and neglect. He traces the outline of her cheek with shaking hands and mutters, "She had your wit, Julius." Not to Livia, to his uncle Caesar, the dead man whose shadow still rules the family. He tries to justify it all. He tells himself he did it for Rome, for order, for the gods. But justification is just regret dressed in armor. Every law he wrote against indulgence now feels like a monument to hypocrisy. He gave the world peace but couldn't give his daughter forgiveness. And the people? They've stopped listening to his sermons about morality. You can only sell virtue for so long before the audience gets bored. Outside, the streets of Rome buzz like always. Wine flows, lovers argue, poets recite forbidden verses. The empire keeps pretending to be pure, but it's dirtier than ever and somehow freer. Because without Julia's laughter, the city had to find its own. Augustus withdraws further, avoiding public life. He claims illness. Maybe it's guilt. His doctors call it a weakness of the heart. They're more right than they know. Then comes the moment, the emperor's final act. On his deathbed, surrounded by officials and sycophants, Augustus delivers his last line to history. "Have I played my part well?" The courtiers nod, eager for the moral of the play. But there's a part they don't record, a whisper only Livia hears. "If only she could have seen Rome as I intended it." It's not apology, just longing in disguise. The tragedy of a man who built eternity but couldn't build forgiveness. Word of his death spreads like wildfire. The empire mourns, statues draped in black, citizens weeping as if Jupiter himself had fallen. But amid the ritual grief, one question lingers in the wind. Does Julia even know? On Pandateria, the waves crash against the cliffs. Same as always. Maybe a messenger reaches her, maybe not. History's fuzzy on that. But I like to think that when the news finally comes, that her father, the god, the emperor, the moral enforcer of the world, has died, she just looks out to sea and says softly, "So the marble cracked after all." Let that sink in. The empire survived Augustus, but his perfection didn't. He built monuments to immortality, but the one thing that lasted was the story of his daughter, standing alone, unbent, and unforgettable. Augustus is dead, But the empire doesn't stop to grieve, it just changes uniforms. The Senate pretends to mourn, the generals pretend to swear loyalty, and Rome pretends it didn't just lose the only man who knew how to keep the chaos barely leashed. Statues are polished, temples renamed, coins minted with new faces. The propaganda machine grinds on, because Rome doesn't do silence. It replaces its gods faster than its guilt. But in one small corner of the world, silence reigns. Pandateria. Julia hears the news the same way she's heard everything for years. Late, distorted, and whispered through trembling lips. A sailor, braver than the rest, delivers it in fragments. The emperor, your father gone.
No ceremony.
No message. No forgiveness. Just 3 words that fall like cold rain. She nods. There's no dramatic outburst, no tears. Just a long exhale, the sound of something breaking quietly inside. The sea, as always, doesn't care. It just keeps breathing against the rocks, eternal and indifferent. For a brief, foolish moment, Julia imagines she might be free now. After all, the emperor is gone. The man who chained her to the idea of morality is finally dust. Surely someone will send for her. Surely Rome has had enough of ghosts. And technically someone does. Her son, Tiberius, now sits on the throne. The same son who once played at her feet while Augustus dictated history. The same son who grew up watching his mother's name erased, his stepmother's smile sharpen, and his father's empire harden into paranoia. Tiberius knows what exile feels like. He was sent away once too, when he became inconvenient to Augustus's perfect image. But time and bitterness have changed him. The message from Rome is short, brutal even. Her conditions of exile will continue. Her allowance will be reduced. Visitors prohibited. Tiberius doesn't even sign it himself. The handwriting belongs to an aide, neat, formal, utterly lifeless. The empire's new god doesn't have time for ghosts either. Julia reads the letter, laughs once. A brittle, humorless sound, and tosses it into the fire. Like father, like son, she mutters, watching the flames curl around the parchment. From that day, her world shrinks again. The guards, newly loyal to Tiberius, confiscate her writing tablets. The food shipments grow smaller. Her clothes wear thin. One by one, the small dignities she'd held on to disappear. Even her lamp oil is rationed, as if Rome is afraid of her having too much light. She begins to waste away quietly. The vibrant, rebellious woman who once filled entire rooms with laughter now speaks to the sea in whispers. But her mind, sharp as ever, never dims. When the guards bring her rations, she greets them with dry humor. "Tell your emperor," she says, "that his morals are safe. I'm too tired to corrupt anyone anymore." Some nights she dreams of Rome, not the marble facades or the Senate's pomp, but the smell of bread, the warmth of torches, the laughter spilling from taverns. She dreams of her children running through gardens, of voices that no longer exist. And when she wakes, she smiles, not because she's happy, but because the dream still felt real for a second. Let that settle, even the exiled can't escape nostalgia. Back in Rome, Tiberius thrives in misery. He rules from afar, preferring the island of Capri over the capital. He surrounds himself with astrologers, sycophants, and fear. The empire grows darker, quieter, colder. Historians will call him paranoid, cruel, detached. But maybe he's just his mother's shadow turned inside out. Proof that unhealed wounds make poor emperors. Julia's name, already taboo, becomes legend. Some say she died long before her body gave out. Others insist she cursed the empire with her last breath. The truth is simpler, sadder, and far more human. She died hungry, forgotten, alone, not with a scream but with a sigh. When they finally find her body, the guards hesitate to touch her. One swears her face still carries a faint smile, as if she knew something they didn't. They bury her quietly, no procession, no eulogy. The empire files her death under administrative closure. And just like that, Rome's most famous scandal becomes an afterthought. But here's the twist Augustus never saw coming. The empire forgets its emperors faster than its sinners. Statues crumble. Names fade. But stories? Stories get retold. And Julia's, whispered from mother to daughter, from poet to listener, becomes a quiet rebellion that outlives marble. She never returned to Rome, but in a way, she never left it either. Every woman who dared to speak, to laugh, to live in a world built to silence her, they were Julia too. Her exile was the beginning of something the empire could never legislate out of existence. Memory. Let that sink in. The empire that built eternity forgot its own heartbeat. And on that forgotten island, beneath the restless wind and the endless sea, lies a woman who understood something Rome never did. That freedom isn't given. It's remembered. History has a type, and it's not kind. It loves men with swords and crowns, not women with opinions. It carves emperors in marble but leaves their daughters as footnotes. And Julia the Elder wasn't the only one. She was just the loudest example of a pattern that Rome, in all its self-proclaimed civilization, never managed to break. Because here's the secret nobody likes to admit. Rome's real empire wasn't built on soldiers or senators. It was built on women's silence. The mothers, wives, and daughters who stitched together the illusion of virtue while the men behind them quietly rewrote morality to fit their moods. Julia's story might sound singular, a rebellious daughter punished for passion, but she was only one chapter in a much bigger tragedy. After her exile, the same moral purge swept through the empire like a sanctimonious plague. Her friends, her lovers, even her daughter Julia the Younger, all punished in the name of purity. The hypocrisy was biblical before the Bible even existed. Take Ovid, the poet. He wrote verses about love, playful, scandalous, alive. The same Rome that once adored his poems suddenly found them corrupting. He was exiled too to the cold edges of the empire. No trial, no mercy. His crime? Writing too much like Julia lived. Then there was Agrippina, Julia's daughter, fierce, outspoken, a mirror of her mother's wit and defiance. The empire tried to tame her the same way it had tamed Julia, by pretending she was dangerous, then punishing her for proving them right. Years later, Agrippina's own daughter would rise to power as the mother of Nero, yes, that Nero, completing the most ironic family circle in Roman history. The empire tried to silence them, but in doing so, it accidentally created legends. Rome couldn't handle women who didn't fit the narrative. To them, a woman was either a goddess or a disgrace, no middle ground. Too virtuous and she's a statue. Too real and she's an exile. Julia dared to be both. Divine in presence, human in desire, and that made her dangerous. But here's where it gets uncomfortably modern. The pattern didn't die with togas and laurel wreaths. It just got Wi-Fi. Replace emperor with media, senate with comment section, and you've got the same empire, obsessed with judging women while pretending to worship them. Let that hit for a second. Julia was called immoral for having affairs in a society where her father's friends bought slaves by the dozen. She was mocked for being too free in a city built on conquest. Sound familiar? 2,000 years later, we're still watching the same show, just with better lighting and hashtags. When a woman steps out of line, the audience still gasps. The cameras still roll. The world still demands an apology for being human. Julia's scandal was just the prototype, the empire's beta test for controlling image over truth. And the most haunting part? It worked. For centuries, her name was buried beneath her father's glory. The textbooks called her the shame of Rome, as if her laughter was the thing that corrupted the empire, not the hypocrisy that exiled her. But memory doesn't die quietly. It lurks. It waits. And every generation rediscovers her, like a ghost whispering through history. I was here first. Imagine all the Julius, the ones who loved too loudly, questioned too boldly, laughed too freely. The empire punished them because it knew something terrifying. Laughter spreads faster than fear. Even Augustus's moral crusade, the one that ruined her life, couldn't outlast the sound of that laughter. By the time of his successors, Rome was back to decadence, luxury, and adultery as if nothing had happened. The emperor's laws turned into punchlines. The daughter he tried to erase became prophecy. proof that you can't legislate desire. Julia's legacy isn't tragedy. It's endurance. She became the blueprint for every woman history tried to delete, and every woman who refused to stay gone. Let's be honest. She would have thrived in the modern world. She'd host dinner parties that broke the internet, make emperors trend for the wrong reasons, and probably have her own talk show titled Virtue is Overrated. She wouldn't just survive the scandal cycle, she'd run it. Rome called her dangerous. They were right, because Julia understood something her father never could. You can't build eternity out of suppression. You can build monuments, sure, but the human spirit will always graffiti its way back into the story. So the next time someone tells you about the glory of Rome, the marble, the temples, the discipline, remember who paid for that illusion. Remember the laughter that echoed through its halls before it was outlawed. Remember Julia, because empires fall. But irony? Irony lives forever. When people picture Rome, they think of marble arches, marching legions, and men in red cloaks yelling about destiny. Nobody remembers the smell, that constant mix of sweat, incense, and political anxiety. Nobody remembers the hunger, the exhaustion, or the quiet cruelty hidden under all that splendor. We say empire like it's a compliment, but if you were standing in it, breathing it, living under it, you might have called it something else entirely. Survival with a PR team. That's the version Julia knew. Not the postcard empire, but the human one, the one built on contradiction. For every marble temple, there was a family breaking under expectation. For every law Augustus passed about morality, there was someone punished for being honest. Rome was brilliant, yes, but it was also deeply afraid of imperfection, of emotion, of women like Julia who reminded them that all their statues were modeled after flawed people. Augustus wanted eternity. Julia wanted a life. That's the real conflict. He believed the empire could outlive death if it stayed pure enough. She knew that was a fantasy. Eternity isn't built on purity. It's built on memory, and memory belongs to the messy, the emotional, the imperfect. Let that sink in. Empires die of many things: war, famine, bad leadership. But mostly they die of hypocrisy. They demand loyalty but trade in betrayal. They celebrate virtue while feeding on sin. Augustus called it the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But peace built on fear is just another kind of war. Julia, for all her scandal, might have been the only honest thing that empire ever produced. She didn't destroy Rome's morals. She revealed them. Her story was a mirror, and when Augustus looked into it, he didn't like what he saw. That's why he shattered it. But mirrors always leave shards, and shards still reflect. Every time a poet defied censorship, every time a senator whispered about justice, every time a woman laughed in public again, that was Julia's ghost at work. Rome loved to build things that looked eternal. Stone, steel, statues. But time has a way of humbling architecture. The Colosseum crumbles, the Senate turns to dust, and the temples are filled with pigeons. Yet her story, the shame of Rome, still stands. How's that for irony? It makes you wonder what we mean when we say civilization. Is it the marble and law, or the compassion underneath it? Is it measured in monuments or in how we treat the inconvenient? Because by those standards, Rome wasn't civilized at all. It was just organized cruelty with better art direction. Julia's exile reminds us that the price of perfection is always paid by someone else. And every time history tries to canonize its heroes, it conveniently forgets the people buried beneath their legends. Augustus got temples, Julia got wind and waves. But guess which one feels more eternal now? Picture it. The cliffs of Pandateria at dusk. The sea endless, gray, shimmering with ghosts. The world she knew is gone, but the tide keeps breathing, steady and ancient, like it remembers. The empire that condemned her is a ruin now, studied by tourists and schoolbooks, while her name, once erased, keeps reappearing in ink, in voice, in defiance. That's what we forget when we say empire. We remember the conquerors, but not the cost. We celebrate the monuments, but not the blood that mixed with the mortar. Julia's story is that cost, the reminder that glory always demands a scapegoat, and history always writes the apology too late. If you listen closely, you can still hear it. The echo between father and daughter, emperor and exile, marble and flesh. The sound of perfection collapsing under the weight of being human. Maybe that's what the ruins are really saying when the wind moves through them. Not look how great we were, but look what we became trying to be perfect. The island sleeps beneath a silver sky. The sea glows faintly, like it remembers too much. Somewhere on the cliffs, the wind hums through the ruins of Julia's villa, the kind of hum that sounds almost like laughter. You can't tell if it's the waves, the wind, or something older. But if you listen long enough, it starts to sound like a woman refusing to be forgotten. Locals, centuries later, will swear they've heard it. The Lady of Pandateria, they'll say. The one who laughed at the empire. They'll tell stories to sailors about a ghost in white robes who walks the shoreline at night, whispering to the sea. Some say she waits for her father to apologize. Others say she's laughing because she knows he never will. It's myth, of course. But myths are just history that refused to stay quiet. Imagine it. The same empire that once silenced her now immortalized her in folklore. Augustus had temples, armies, statues. Julia had words, wit, and defiance. And she outlasted him. Because marble cracks. But laughter travels. You can almost see her there, barefoot, hair wild in the salt wind, eyes lit with that sharp, dangerous amusement that once terrified senators. The moon paints her in silver and shadow, and she looks like every woman who ever dared to exist beyond permission. For a moment, the world feels timeless. The empire that condemned her is gone, but the echo remains. That's the thing about laughter. It's contagious even across centuries. Rome thought it could erase her by rewriting the narrative, but all it really did was create the perfect punchline. The shame of Rome became the proof that Rome could feel shame at all. And maybe that's why her story still lingers, because we recognize her. Every generation has a Julia. The one who doesn't fit, the one who asks why, the one who laughs at the wrong time in the wrong room. The empire changes names, changes clothes, changes gods, but it never stops trying to control what it doesn't understand. Julia's defiance isn't tragic anymore. It's triumphant. She wasn't crushed by exile. She transformed it. The island became her final stage, her audience the sea and the stars. And that laughter, that last, unrepentant sound, turned into Rome's most enduring rebellion. Let that settle. Her father built monuments to eternity. She became eternity, because long after the empire burned, after the statues eroded and the temples fell, her story still moves. Not in textbooks, not in sermons, but in spirit. Every time someone questions authority, every time someone refuses to stay quiet when told to be perfect, Julia lives again. Maybe the wind on Pandateria isn't laughter at all. Maybe it's the world remembering what it sounds like to be free. So breathe that in, the salt, the silence, the defiance. This is the sound of history exhaling. They call this boring history. Sure, if your idea of excitement is watching empires implode in slow motion. Julia the Elder's story isn't some dusty moral lesson. It's the most cinematic breakup between power and humanity you'll ever hear. She didn't just challenge her father's empire. She exposed it. Think about it. Every marble pillar, every law about purity, every self-righteous speech Augustus ever gave, all undone by one woman who refused to live like a statue. He built eternity. She gave it feelings, and that's what really terrified him. Rome wanted her gone so badly it tried to delete her from memory, but that's the thing about memory. It's sneaky. It hides in gossip, in poetry, in that tiny voice that whispers whenever someone powerful says, "For your own good." Julia became that whisper. Fast forward 2,000 years. We still live in empires, they just have Wi-Fi and better fonts. They still preach virtue while selling chaos. They still love a scandal more than truth. And every time a woman's laughter gets labeled disrespectful, every time someone in charge panics because authenticity can't be legislated, somewhere, Julia rolls her eyes from whatever cosmic island she's on. She wasn't perfect. She was alive. And that's what history keeps confusing. Perfection is propaganda. Life is rebellion. She laughed in the face of marble morality and got exiled for it. But look who's still getting the last laugh. So no, this isn't boring. This is the sound of the empire cracking, of one human voice echoing through centuries of stone. You can call it gossip, tragedy, irony. I call it survival with good lighting. Maybe tonight, when the world feels a little too polished, pour a drink, step outside, and listen. If the wind catches just right, you might hear it, that sharp, defiant laughter riding the breeze from a forgotten island. That's Julia reminding you, history only dies when you stop retelling it. If you made it this far, you didn't just hear history, you resurrected it. So hit that subscribe, leave a comment for Julia, and maybe whisper a cheers to the girl who turned exile into legend. Because the Empire tried to silence her, but you just gave her the mic back.